Hello, welcome to the latest episode of Data Unchained. I'm your host, Molly Presley, and I'm super excited to introduce our two guests today. But before I do that, let me tell you just a bit about this podcast if this is your first time joining the show. Data Unchained was developed as a way to have conversations about the challenges as well as the opportunities as data has become increasingly decentralized. So if you think back into the mainframe days, back when the computers, the people, the applications were all in one big data center together, and then the world today where the people using data are spread all over the world, data is being generated across multiple clouds, sometimes even suborbitally, coming out of satellites, rockets, things like that. And all of us are trying to figure out how to gain more insights and move more quickly with the data sets that are accessible to us. And so Data Unchained is going to really dig into today, primarily in the media and entertainment space, some of the evolutions and tools that are available today. And, some of the best practices just around using cloud services a little bit more generically if you're not in the media space. So without further ado, let me introduce, we have Rob and Paul from IMT Global Services. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Molly.
Thanks for having us.
Rob, tell us a little bit about your background. I know you're a solutions architect on the fairly senior, more experienced level over at IMT Cloud Services. Tell us a little bit about your background, how you came to be a part of the company, and then we'll meet Paul next.
Sure. It's been a bit of a wandering experience and journey along the lines. I actually started out with a reseller that sold some AutoCAD, and they wanted to branch out into an application that only ran on a Silicon Graphics workstation. And they needed somebody to actually look after the installations and learning the operating system and getting things going. And I kind of volunteered for the position. And then from that, I got into working in the media and entertainment, which is some product they brought along. And actually, some of my coworkers and myself, we went out and on our own and kind of started up a company that just did media and entertainment software, hardware, and also for CAD/CAM and manufacturing type things. And we kind of worked with that through the days, selling Silicon Graphics, Onyxes, and other types of equipment. And that's actually where I met Paul at IMAX as one of our clients. And we eventually got bought out by another company where we met another gentleman that's part of our IMT team, Bert Silva. And we eventually worked for a company that actually went kind of bankrupt, and we ventured out on our own, continuing along the same lines, selling Silicon Graphics workstations and media and entertainment software. And by this time, things were moving over to the PC type marketplace, but also included on that would have been storage devices, Isilon, and other EMC storage, along with NetApp and so on. And we supplied local colleges. And again, IMAX was one of our clients at that time also. Again, still working with Paul when he was at IMAX. And during the kind of later, I guess, 2000 teens, I guess, the 2017, 2018, we kind of saw the hardware marketplace and that kind of slowing down a little bit, moving more towards the cloud and deployments in the cloud. So we started looking at moving into that direction, and we ended up starting up a company called Dead Drop Labs. And we ran that for a little while, and a little over a year ago, we were purchased by IMT Global.
I find it interesting how you said early in your changed the trajectory of your career. It's interesting how that happens, isn't it? That you're early on, somebody needs some help with something, and then all of a sudden you're skyrocketed into something you maybe never would have planned for.
You know what? It's almost fun to try out new things and learn about the new stuff, or else your job gets really boring. So I didn't want to stagnate, and it was kind of, I'll be honest, my job was very boring at the time, so it sounded like a great way to change things up a little bit, and I think it worked out for the better.
Nice. I had an early career experience where I was doing an internship documenting research for IBM while I was just about to start my medical program, so to go into my MD program. And they asked, could somebody help with managing our Oracle database? And I had some Oracle experience because it was used a lot in organizing medical information, research information. I said, sure, I'll do that. And all of a sudden I was a DBA and didn't go to the medical field and didn't like being a DBA at all. But it ended up launching me into this trajectory of IT, which I never would have expected. And it was like you say, why not try new things? You never know where it's going to take you.
Exactly.
So, Paul, tell us a little bit about you. I know you're the VP of the Cloud Services over there at IMT Cloud Services, but maybe a little bit more of the background, what Dead Drops Labs did. I think those of us in the media space are quite familiar with the company, but maybe share a little bit more about your history, Dead Drop, and then what's going on in the Cloud Services division there at IMT.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you're mentioning about things, the way you end up in these. Let's start with me. I'm way back, was taking computer science at University of Toronto, came out, worked a bunch of pre-internet kind of startup things. And I also played in bands, like as a guitarist. So someone at IMAX, they were doing this kind of interactive game, said, well, you know programming, music. Can you come in and do some of the, audio for these, demos that we're doing?
No way.
And that
cool.
led to a 25 years at IMAX.
I presume you
I'd never
instantly said
expected.
yes. You didn't have to think about it for very long.
Yeah, no, I was really happy because
That's
they're
awesome.
especially for then around Toronto. It was they're doing a lot of it's under the R&D department, doing a lot of research, a lot of new stuff. Like Rob said, new stuff's interesting, and I like that. And so I ended up staying there, and that set the whole path for 25 years there, where I did was in the R&D doing is. The other good thing about IMAX, they're on from cameras on set right to distributing to theaters, so you kind of get a full range of services there. So it keeps it interesting. We did things like the DMR, which is taking Hollywood type films. Back then it was 35 millimeter to 70 millimeter prints, and then to digital to streaming enhancement, 2D, 3D conversions, all those kind of things that IMAX was into. But that kind of, as companies do, they go through cycles, and after that being that long, it's kind of rare to be at a place that long these days, but it was just time to move on. And as I said, I worked at Rob on so many projects all the way through, and it's strange that the common aspect was that storage. It was like that's what we were common. Things changed on lab. That was the common thing we were dealing with all along. And we just saw that at the end of my time, I was running render farms in LA and China and Toronto here, and it just the way we had planned to go there was, we saw the cloud. That's really where there's a lot of potential there. Just the scalability issues that we get when you have a fixed kind of render farm, and so that's when we came out of IMAX. Rob and I and Bert just decided that was where we wanted to keep our M&E specialty. That's where we have a lot of experience, and we really enjoy that industry. And it's a unique industry, so it's some people may not enjoy it, but we really appreciated the aspects of it. So we formed Dead Drop Labs, and that was basically primarily dealing with VFX, animation, post, a little bit of production, like on set type stuff, but enabling them to take advantage of the cloud for workstations, storage, data movement, rendering, big thing. So we did that for quite a few years, and we stayed relatively core group. And from there, we just we were introduced to the IMT guys, who are also have a wider media and entertainment background. They're located in Los Angeles, which a lot of our clients were as well. And it just seemed a very good fit. So we joined them probably about a year and a half ago now, I think. And so that's been great. Really being able to combine their experience, and they're very storage centric with what we're doing with the cloud and what we're doing with our clients.
So media and entertainment space, I've worked in my career across a lot of vertical markets. And one of the things I find about media that's super interesting is you push the fringes of technology in the media space a lot. For all of us who enjoy our latest Netflix content, even online gaming, big Hollywood productions, to create those, there's a lot of magic going on in the background of, the artists doing visual effects, computer generated work, big compute farms. A lot of media and entertainment companies have HPC experts because there's compute needs. So I bring that up in this conversation because we have a lot of listeners from your space, but others who are from other spaces. And what I found interesting is whenever I've managed user groups for the companies I work for, people tend to really love to hear what the media folks are doing because you are pushing the fringes. Sometimes, without some of the constraints that an enterprise has, you have a little bit more freedom to innovate and move quickly. Maybe can you just talk a little bit about what does a workflow look like in media, and maybe how has it evolved through COVID as people, artists, and talent got a little bit more distributed?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk to the high level, and Rob could probably get into the details a little. But I think the way we were running, and it's always been a very distributed kind of industry. Where people are all over the world. They're shooting somewhere, they're doing posts somewhere else, they're looking at dailies elsewhere. But I think that it was before COVID. It was still very much you had a place like in Toronto, and you had a huge warehouse, and you brought in 100 artists, and they sat there in the dark. I remember we bought this beautiful warehouse, or renting a place for production, beautiful windows. The first thing they do is cover them in black, paper, and that was it, because it's reflecting off the screens. But it's you still had that mentality, and there was some really great aspects about that, and everyone in the same room, and there's a lot of collaboration. But more and more we saw as you go with specialists and that it was getting global reach. And I think when COVID came along, obviously that was a huge accelerator where artists realized, they can work, from remotely. Studios started to realize they can, handle having artists remotely. But I think it does raise, the biggest probably issue with that, and Rob can probably talk about that when it comes to workflow, was data. How do you get data to the artists? How do you keep it secure? How do they have the data they need to do their work? And how do they get it back to, the central location? And how do you keep it all organized and verified? And so that's the biggest problem, I think, with that aspect. But I think that the actual workflow, it suits a remote working kind of situation, because there's a lot of just an artist heads down doing their work, doing the thing, and then collaborating. So I think it suits that. But Rob can definitely talk about how that affected workflow.
Sure. I mean, anybody that's kind of worked in media and entertainment and actually been in the trenches know that workflow and studios in many cases are held together by baling wire and twine, and the job number one is getting the production out, getting it out on time, and making sure it's a quality product. And that's first and foremost. How you get there isn't necessarily as important, and sometimes there's a lot of people running around with their chickens, like chickens with their heads cut off, just trying to get things done and fix little problems that come up and arise. The problem is when we start now taking those workers out of a single kind of location and a single studio and start moving them to remote working and everything else, some of those solutions that are kind of held together don't really stand up that move. So there's a lot of teething problems, and it happened very quickly without a huge amount of really notice as far as IT departments and for planning and everything else. It's all kind of we can't bring people into the studio anymore. How do we work? How do we get the stuff out? We've got jobs to do. We've got deadlines and so on. So there's a lot of figuring of things out, and even things like your remote display technologies and things like that were just kind of starting, and they're looking at it, but they hadn't really been battle tested or anything else. So that was all kind of part of the whole starting into the cloud infrastructure. But that also uncovered another issue, is how do you keep all your data kind of synchronized between the original and current on-premise storage devices, all their NAS devices, and some of these people have multiple petabytes of data that they're having to deal with on a daily basis. How do you keep that? How do you keep track of it? And also, how do you make all of that data available in your cloud-based compute when the ability for you to move it in and out of the cloud is going to be limited by bandwidth and things like that. You can only move data at so fast. So how do you make it available, and how do you plan what data you have? And that again comes from a situation where when you have tons of storage, it doesn't matter if you track every little piece of storage because it's always available. But when you start moving it around from point A to point B, now you have to figure out, well, I don't want to move 10 petabytes of data to the cloud. I want to just move the stuff I need but nobody really knows exactly what they need because they've never had to. So that infrastructure and the ability to do that at that time was severely lacking, and it really still is fairly lacking. You can't. I don't think I know of a single studio I can go into and say, give me everything that this shot requires and nothing extra, but don't miss anything. And nobody can really put their finger on that data and what it's going to be and everything else. So that's kind of a bit of a trick. And that's kind of where some newer storage solutions have kind of been taking us and making life a little bit easier and a little bit quicker to deploy, much faster also.
So I want to delve into those storage solutions a little bit, but maybe before we do, what is the role of metadata? How is it assigned, tracked? Do you have the solutions you need today? Are you hoping for something new? And I'm really kind of thinking about just the idea of how do you even know which data is associated to a project before you even try to do something with it, whether it's move it, render it, whatever it is you're trying to do.
But typically metadata is usually stored in a database somewhere and is associated usually with some sort of version control software that studio might be using to track changes across shots and monitor revisions of those and what is the approved version and so on and so forth. Again, that part is really easy, but as soon as you start moving that data around to another place, tracking that metadata with the actual data you're moving around gets a little bit more difficult. So, other than keeping it in a folder structure, unless your storage device allows you to tag all the metadata onto everything, so it's living with the file, it can be a tough thing to track, and there's a huge amount of effort to track that and to find it, because if you lose a piece of data, how do you find it? So how do you search for it amongst petabytes and petabytes of data? I mean, we've got customers with file counts of over 1 billion files, and if you've ever do a search for a file with specific data or even a partial file name and it's been lost, it can take forever to locate it in a file cache as large as that is. So that is a challenge, and that's slowly being solved, I think.
And I think if we come back to what Rob's saying, I definitely relied on it. I think most people do. When you had the kind of pre-remote workflow, you have everyone's in the same room, so you've got storage, everyone's kind of got that mounted, and the goal ideally would be to, as you're saying, track every asset that's related to every shot and every version, and that is the ultimate goal. And there are lots of tools, and people do make those efforts, and in some cases achieve that. But you don't want to stifle, like you were saying before, Molly. It's an industry of creativity, along with academic kind of advancements for algorithms, along with a business that needs to be done in certain deliverables. So you don't want to stifle that creativity or the innovation that's happening. So you want to, it always comes back, you can't, you do rely on just having that data there when you need it. It's and the idea of being able to say, as Rob's saying, take all this one data for one shot, bundle up, move it, is can only be done to to a certain extent. So I think that's kind of where we're at. I think maybe one day there will be this ultimate tracking of every little piece of data in that. But right now you want to have some of that kind of shared chaos a little. So which is a problem when you go to the cloud and you've got someone now in Korea who needs some data that's in Toronto. So
what are some of the tools you're using? Rob alluded to, there's some advancements in storage and maybe how you're integrating cloud services. What are some of the tools as you guys are architecting a cloud opportunity for one of your customers, or they're wanting to do some cloud studio work or cloud rendering? What are the tools you generally kind of use in your toolkit?
It's varying, and it's a constantly evolving set of tools. I mean, originally, people used to FTP files from point A to point B, and that eventually kind of evolved to other types of streaming type protocols that would that were UDP based, that would go through and try to stream and make use of the best available bandwidth you have while minimizing the the side effects of that latency of that transfer over distances might have. So things like Aspera and so on.
Rob, you missed the
Sorry?
one in the middle where you put people on a plane carrying disk drives. And honestly, that was a delivery pattern we've had on many productions. Just
Well, I
here you
remember
go.
you talking about a producer throwing somebody on a plane with a hard drive, or even in the older days with a reel of film, and flying them from point A to point B so that the media was there, and it basically had a personalized chaperone to make sure it was there, because you could never rely on shipping it, or you didn't want it out of somebody's sight, right?
Two reasons: security was always a big thing, and yeah, you just knew that if you put them on the plane, it'd be there. And it was always you could always tell the new people, because they'd be the one doing it, because you'd who'd like a free trip to LA? It's like, oh, everyone puts their hands up till they realize it's to LAX and right back, and then it's not quite as enjoyable.
You don't go see Disneyland and the beaches while you're there.
No chance. Yeah, you can see it from the plane as you fly over, and then you fly right back. But it's that it shows you and that is not many years ago, really, where people are, there's that, some of it's limitation of speed, a lot of it's just security aspects, and others it's just, it was there was nothing really to fit that gap between it. But I don't think we see that so much anymore, and I think there are a lot of solutions. The general studio solutions are fairly set. We with AWS EC2s, their compute was basically be workstations and render nodes, and there's a huge range of instance types that people can run. And so the basic setup, say for Studio Cloud, with Rob, we'll get that workstation going with the applications and the workflow on there. Create like what's called an AMI in the AWS, it's just like a golden image, and then they can launch as many workstations as they want from there. Similar sort of thing for the render, and that's the basic kind of high level how you do the studio. But then you need all those workstations and render nodes, the scalability, need access to the same sort of data. So that's the next question is, how do you do that?
So there's kind of two pieces there on the cloud services side. You have the need to have access to all the data, and historically sharing data across cloud services or cloud regions has been a bit of a challenge. As you think about global companies, they probably have data sitting in different regions or different services. How do you handle that? Is it another copy and move? Are you using something like Hammerspace or LucidLink? How do you handle that part?
It really depends on the situation. I mean, originally, part of the internal pipeline that many studios develop on their own, they've even gone to simple things of just calling an rsync command. Somebody checks something out, and the data actually gets rsynced from point A to point B, and when that's finished, then the user has access to it. But that tends to be kind of inefficient, and it's it's a hack, but it gets the job done. And sometimes when you need to get the job done quickly, it's what gets developed, and unfortunately some of that stuff kicks around for much longer than it really needs to be or should be kicking around, but it is there. LucidLink is one solution that we can use. It comes with its performance benefits, but also as limitations with that. Things like stored replication. So you take a file or a folder structure and you replicate it onto another storage device, maybe in the cloud, and have it replicate there. The problem is how do you replicate it back? Usually that replication is just in a single direction. So then you have to pick another folder in the cloud and replicate that structure back to the original on-prem location. Then that also gets even a little bit more complex when you add a third location into the mix, because you replicate. How do you replicate to multiple locations and keep all those locations in sync with each other, especially if they're sharing data back and forth? So that all of a sudden becomes a much more difficult data paradigm to kind of solve and manage. Actually, Hammerspace has given us a really cool tool in the arsenal, because it allows you to replicate many sites to many sites, and they can make available the data that is in a folder across many sites, and it manages all of the movement of that data between the sites, either through recipes of data movement, for lack of a better way to put it or to explain it, or even just based on metadata or access times and things like that, or it could even be on demand situation where something slips through the cracks. Nobody knows it. It's all part of that data that nobody nobody can put their finger on every single piece of data, but as long as it's somewhere, the system knows where it is and it knows how to pull it from the remote site and deal with it. But on the flip side, it also knows how to inform all the other sites about that modified data or relocated data, so they can always find the fastest way to access that data again and possibly get it back to the original location, which might be your source of truth for your data set.
So it sounds like kind of a nice automation single tool versus, kind of, you're saying the rsync or manual copies and things like that we're evolving from in a lot in cases.
Yeah, when it comes back to that kind of thing we talk, where retaining some of that chaos, where you don't really want to force on, the process. People's jobs, the artists, the people making, their job is not to track data; it's to create. So, by using something like Hammerspace, it kind of brings it back to a little bit where, they can have access to the data. It's a simple model for, the work is done in the background for them. So the mental model of the data is you have access all to the same data. Now, of course, there's some caveats in there, and, we can talk about that a little bit, but the base mental model is there, that you have this pool of data and it's managed. You can just get it when you need it, and everyone else can see it, and it's moved as required.
And we've talked a fair bit about kind of the artists and the humans who are working with the content. What about the machines? Like when you're thinking about rendering, I've talked to a lot of customers who either don't own enough compute, or the compute they want to use in their local AWS region is more expensive than compute in another region. Just how, when you're advising your clients on how to use the cloud and how to most optimally get your render jobs done as quickly and cost effectively as possible, how do you approach that with them?
It's tough, and it's customer specific, and it really depends on where their pain points really are. Initially, most cloud computing ended up in kind of overflow rendering, and it was, we've got a job, we've got to hit a deadline, and we have to deliver this product by a certain day, and we only have so much rendering, and unless we find more render capability somewhere, we are going to miss that. So we're going to possibly be paying penalties and so on and so forth. So cloud and the ability to burst their renders in emergency situations to the cloud was kind of like the starting point. And then it started becoming more of a business model where the amount of on-premise render nodes and things like that, as they kind of naturally atrophied through their age and got too slow and stuff like that, when they started replacing them, they didn't replace them in the same quantities that they may have had originally. So they may have had render farms with 50 or 100 or 500 nodes, depending on the size of the studio. But what ended up happening is, even though we had 500, we're going to reduce that to 200 on-premise, and then we're going to kind of make up for it in those crunch times by using cloud resources, so that they no longer have a huge stagnant kind of render farms sitting around. Now, that's kind of a bad way to put it, because render farms are never stagnant, because if anybody's ever worked in a studio and worked with an artist, given a fixed amount of render capabilities, artists will use 100% of the maximum render capabilities they have available to them. So generally, for their, they want to do trials, they want to see what comes back when they perform a render, if they make a lighting change and things like that. That iterative creative process, it all takes time, and the more render capabilities they have, the more iterations they can do, and hopefully, in theory, the better the product they are able to deliver in the end. Sometimes people can't make a decision, and it doesn't necessarily make a better product. It just ends up costing more time and resources. But that's generally the workflow of it. So the question is how do we make sure enough that we can keep our investment in our render farm going 100%, but when it really comes down to production, that we have to say, yes, we have to put the pen to the paper here and get this output done. How do we do it? So most companies are now starting to take that rendering and move more of the mission critical stuff or the excess rendering that might be required into the cloud. And then with the COVID, that also forced the movement of workstations to the cloud. due to rendering, some of that data might already be in the cloud. So some workstations were fairly simple, and it was very specific when they migrated the data to the cloud initially, because all the capability of keeping everything in sync with the on-prem storage and everything else, that was a huge amount of effort and work, and nobody had the solutions on short notice like that. With things like a Hammerspace, we could have a company launch, maybe working out of Atlanta, and they might launch a studio in the UK with workers based out of the UK, taking advantage of tax credits or whatever else that's available in the region where they're actually doing the production and hiring the artists and everything. But their data still has to synchronize back to the main studio in Atlanta, for example. So how do you set that up? How do you get the storage there? How do you replicate the data over there on a fairly short notice type basis? And then when it's all done, how do we collapse it all back? But also, how do we not replicate every piece of storage that we have in head office to that studio and make sure that only the active data is actually there? So that then becomes things like lifecycle management of that data. So if it's not used anymore, where can we put it, or can we migrate it all back to where it normally lives because we're not using it anymore? It was used maybe early in the production, but that stuff is now rolled off. They're old versions. It's not active, but we still have to archive it somewhere. So let's move it back to our massive storage, or even archive it as a function of access times and metadata and maybe state and versions and things like that, and make some intelligent decisions about the actual data we have and deal with it that way. So you can shrink your footprint that's required for actual spinning disk, decrease the size of your storage devices in each local location where you're doing your production, but still have access to all of your data if it is required, on the short term. And the other thing is, you don't have to have somebody sitting, going through archives and requesting restores and things like that, which is, how many companies have somebody that's sitting in the back room managing all of their backups and making sure they have all their offsites and rotating the backups and making sure that, we've had a tape that's been backed up like 8 years ago. It should actually be reread and rewritten to a new tape because it's getting old, right? All that if you can manage your data and you can automate that whole process of moving your data around, it certainly saves a huge amount of effort, and it's always available, and you know where it is, and you can get it at a moment's notice. That's huge.
Like you're saying, Molly, with the, how do you there's so many factors and parameters in the storage in cloud with money, like regions, some are more expensive for this type, some other regions have availability of this type machine but not this machine, and we can't there's no one solution to any of that. You can't give a blanket answer that says this is the best way to go, because a lot of it depends on the evolving pipeline of the particular studio. Can they take advantage of it? Where do they need to have their verification data sent to? Where is it being worked on? Archiving, how long do they need to keep it? These are all factors, and it can get complex. But I think it kind of could be what's the saying? It's not a bug, it's a feature of the cloud, that it is complex, and that gives it. If you really want to dig into it, and as you work through it, there are options. There are a lot of options for people to do, as far as what's the best way to go, performance versus cost versus convenience.
So how does a company engage with the IMT Cloud Services group? Are you primarily advisory? Do you have a suite of product that you offer? Can you tell us a little bit more about kind of day-to-day how you help users navigate a fairly complex situation?
Our role is really to assist a studio or a client with their getting their pipeline, getting their functionality into the cloud. We always say, the client is the expert. They know their pipeline. There's nothing we can tell them about their pipeline that they don't know and they want to do. But what we can do is, take away, the day-to-day and some of the, we have the experience with the AWS services. We know what kind of works best. We can definitely come up with a baseline that is best practices as far as, functionality. Also for security auditing things, there's very specific things that need to be done. And if we get those in place right from the start, that proper structure, and then bring them into that and help them implement their pipeline, that's kind of where we see ourselves. So we see ourselves as there to set up the base structures, assist them in getting their pipeline and working through getting that working in the cloud for them. So it's, in our case, the model is it's all their infrastructure. They own all the infrastructure. We set up the initial for them, and then we help them operate it and set it up, as opposed to, say, a platform model where people come and, we already have studio set up and here's your machines,
Right.
and and we own them, and we just kind of send you a bill. So our role really is for studios, and it runs the range. You might think, okay, that's more of established kind of a studio model, but we have the full range from startup kind of small places with 2 or 3 people to 1,000 artist kind of studio. And either way, we create this infrastructure and we set it up for them, and then it's theirs.
I've seen, though, it's sometimes you can identify the size of a company by the number of people. In media and entertainment, that's not necessarily the case at all. I find there's some small companies who are doing the most interesting projects with Apple, Netflix, Disney, whoever it might be. It's kind of interesting that a small group of talent can make big impact in big productions. But I think your services are even more important in those cases, because you want organizations like that want their team focused on the creative production, not the IT services. And they're generally not experts in the IT services, or if they are, it's begrudgingly. It's not because they necessarily want to be. So let them do the creative work while you can help them get their infrastructure set up. Is that a reasonable way to think about it?
That's, I think, really important, and that's where it kind of came from. And it's kind of good being an IMAX because they're creating content. They're creating movies. They're doing space movies. They're doing working with Hollywood directors to do IMAX specific things. So it was a good introduction along with new technology, and quickly realizing the technology is there to make what shows up on the screen, or the artistic intent. It's about facilitating that. As much as I enjoy technology, and sometimes that is the point, really the point is the way it's used. So I think that with the cloud, that's kind of a nice way. It removes that barrier of entry with the tools. So if you're like you're saying, a small group that has great ideas and real skill, they may have been hamstrung in the past because they don't have money to buy $1 million worth of hardware and then put it in a room and have someone even deal with the air conditioning to the room. They can go to the cloud, that can be set up. It's kind of as much as it can, and more and more AWS is evolving the studio model to a kind of pay as you go. They're trying to evolve the services so they are more pay as you go. So the idea being, this small group can set up. There's no real major charge to get started. The charges only happen when there's work and when they're doing something. So to me, that's what was appealing to me was I saw that as ability for a larger group of artists, giving them access and being able to give them more control over what they're doing. And we've seen a lot of that. But we also see that that's the same as true for a large studio. They have the same goals as well. They want to create good results. So it's really, for the same reason that works, same for the larger studio. They can be more flexible. They can, as Rob said, iterations. Time is often seen as a deadline type thing, but I think, as Rob said, it's also the number of iterations you can get done in that time. So the more times you can have a look at something, go, yeah, that looks good, that doesn't, and have that collaboration between people about what's working, the better result you're going to get in the end. So I think that's the other aspect that, works for the smaller and the larger studios as well.
Yeah, I remember we were at NAB a year or two ago. That's a big broadcast convention that happens each year in Las Vegas for this industry, which you guys, of course, know very well. But for those who don't, I was looking at a demo of Flame, which is a really interesting tool for finishing, and where you can finish pictures, color correction, things like that. And looking at the demonstration of if you can have these remote creators collaborating, where maybe I'm changing eye color, you're changing lipstick, you want to make a extraterrestrial looking being, the more you can do that real time and see, does this look good or not, especially when we have different minds trying to create something cool. It's really neat to see what that real time collaboration can enable and how much more powerful an image or a look can be. I love watching that stuff.
It is, and Rob's had this experience in the past with the old like Flame suites when they would be in the a lot of like advertising and things like that, and it would be a room somewhere, and to use those, hundreds of dollars an hour, and it's the kind of thing where it's so expensive, it's more like there's a nice couch, and then that was a big part of a studio, and and for good reason, because it meant someone could sit there and with the artist and go, yeah, exactly what you're saying. Oh, that looks good. That doesn't. Rather than, okay, come back next Tuesday and we'll see, how that looks, and everyone's forgotten what they were
And then
talking about.
Tuesday after that, and next thing
Yeah, and
weeks
it's
have
like, no, that
passed.
wasn't it. So and now, yeah, you're right. It's having to be able to that remote connectivity between people and just the accessibility. You don't have to have, and that was one of the things AWS demonstrated. I think of the SIGGRAPH before last, which was now remote. A lot of people didn't see that as being cloud capable because of data issues, latency issues, things like that. But showing now that they can demonstrate that a flame, and we know certain people in certain companies that's their focus. They're just putting in flames in the cloud for people too, and it's a bit of a throwback because it was this big hardware thing, but now that it's more available as a cloud thing, then people want to use it more.
So I want to talk about AI for a little bit. This is a topic that a lot of people are interested in. I feel like anybody in the world who watches content, which I think everyone does, has seen kind of what's happening with AI, good, bad, and that type of thing. But even taking a step back, I remember it was maybe 5-10 years ago when a company called Veritone came out, and they were using AI to process and assign metadata to images. That was the thing that I saw them doing that was really cool. They could, make a bunch of metadata around Brad Pitt is smiling at 2 minutes and 42 seconds, and then a car blew up in 5 minutes and 62 seconds, and interesting metadata, which you could search to help make content findable. And that seemed just like all helpful, instead of human beings have to manually doing everything. But now you fast forward to Gen AI and people seeing, artificial representations of actors and things like that. Tell us just, how is AI being used in your space? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it a mixed bag? I'm curious on your perspectives on this.
The simple answer is yes.
And I think in different ways that you're saying, Molly, is one way. And Rob pointed before, if you got a billion files, sure, you could have keywords and things that people put in, and in the old days too, early kind of AI or tagging, would put fairly superficial things that And I recently saw a talk, and it was at NEB last time, and it was with a sports guys. I think it was maybe NFL. It was NFL, and it's funny. Sports guys I've known over here, they're always at the advance. You think M&E is? It's like sports are the ones that really push the envelope sometimes.
Everything's real time with them, right?
And that's the thing. And then they do it real time. It's embarrassing. We're in rendering and 20 minutes a frame, and then they're doing it real time. Slight quality difference, but still it's incredible to see. But the guy there had a thing, and we're seeing a bit of this adoption, but specifically he said they put in the data, so they want to analyze, and so they can look for a clip and say, show me this team scoring a touchdown, spiking the ball enthusiastically, something like that. And that's the kind of thing that's not something that someone's, you're really going to get with keywords type of thing. But it's an AI metadata tagging at that point. And his words were, and I thought it was interesting that, the AI kind of at that point, he realized understood the game kind of like a person, in the sense that they got what spiking was and how it's happy or not, and so I think those kind of things applied to, reference models for artists, creating consistency across, multiple artists on a film, on thousands of shots, that aspect of alone. Then it's the Gen AI of creating the images where, it's a bit of a touchy topic, because once you start generating images, it's hard to know. But I would say mostly what we're seeing is more on the assisting artists, assisting production, things like on the meta tagging. I think there's still a long way to go. There's some exciting things you see about, AI video generation, but I think it's got a long way to go before it's coming close to creating that vision that the artist brings to it. But I think more and more we're seeing it's a really good tool for assisting people and making them, removing some of the drudgery from the work. And again, like you said before, like the hardware, like technology, letting them focus on the creative aspect rather than the drudgery aspects of it.
AI is just one of those things that it's a hot topic right now, and there's a lot of things that are involved with AI that are very, can be very strong talking points and can be very scary, for people also. I mean, image generation is to me, it's kind of scary in the way that, where did that source of the image come from? What data was used to generate that image? Was it based on, scraping of some anonymous data that really wasn't meant to be shared with somebody, and we're now using it? So from the actual copyright of the original training data and so on, and where it came from and everything else, it's a really, really hard question to answer, and I think there's going to be a lot of discussion regarding it over the next, probably 3 or 4 years, and until some sort of agreement has come properly, and limits and bounds and controls of the use of AI and how far it goes. And I don't think it's just strictly for M&E type things. I think it's usage of AI as a whole. But again, this isn't really an AI discussion, so
no, but I think it's
topic.
interesting because I think we can all relate some to. We've all seen something, a likeness of someone that, was promoted on some sort of media that was not them, and it's interesting. But like you say, this isn't an AI discussion, and that tool, as far as automating work, making creators more productive, is a great piece in the tool bag, if you get out of the content creation side of it. And I think that's worth emphasizing, because there's some greatness there too, making production quality faster and whatnot.
I mean, I'll be honest. I'm a fan of seeing Homer Simpson as a human, right? So I mean, if they want to do that and generate a Simpsons movie with Homer as a human, and the whole human family, that's all in the likeness of Homer Simpson, the cartoon character, I'm all for it. I mean, well, there you go. I mean, I think you can do a lot of things. Well, I think you can do a lot of things with AI that maybe you can't do in the real life, and have some fun and be creative with it. And I think it's the creative side of things that I think is where things go with the creativity, is I think could be a really cool thing.
One I can say, like, practical thing that AWS people have come to AWS do AI is one of the aspects we talk about, of the sharing of the data that you're teaching with. So that, obviously, if you're developing, some IP content, characters, you don't want to be really feeding that to public AIs, because, that is all then incorporated, or can be, there's many different ways to do it, but it can be incorporated then into the model. And that's something that, for people who don't want to do. So I think AWS has done a good job of focusing on the AI aspect as well, but also just on that security aspect. So with their kind of Bedrock, it's a lot of people like it because you can program so that you're using it, but it's your data was siloed. And as of course, security is a big issue with all media and entertainment things because of the value of this intellectual property of these characters. So at least going forward, that you can use the tools there for your own work without having it, being then shared with people that you may not want them to. But there's so much to be figured out there. It's a lot to it's going to be interesting.
So as we tie things up, what is the best way to get in touch with you? Is if folks are listening and saying, I think these guys could help me, are there any certain types of projects you in particular like to get involved in? How best to get in touch with you?
I think just IMT website, and that would connect to us, or you can email Rob or I, if directly, that's fine. And the projects we tend to deal with, keep in mind we are helping with the cloud aspects, AWS particularly, and so anyone who have that experience in the industry, and I think that's important for anyone who's going to the cloud, is that the people that you're partnering with to go with the cloud understand your industry, because there's a lot of people who understand the cloud, and it's a great technology, and there's a lot of tools there, and once you're on there, you have access to all these other tools. But it's important that it's someone who understands your particular workflows and pipelines and just method of operation. Putting say enterprise of accountants, 100 accountants to the cloud would be different than putting 100 artists. Although the underlying technology is the same. The overall requirements and expectations of those groups is going to be different. So, we like to think that we're always learning, but we have a lot of experience in dealing with a lot of people. We enjoy working with people from VFX, animation, production. That's where we spent all our time, and we enjoy showing the advantages that people have of the cloud. So I think anything in that area, we'd love to talk to them.
And are you global? I mean, your company name kind of implies that, but do you work primarily with Hollywood type studios or anywhere around the world? Does that work out well for you staffing wise?
It's funny, we started it and it was, very weird thinking on our part because it was a cloud. We were Toronto based originally. Our now IMT is out of California. But we thought, well, Toronto is a huge, area for creative things. We thought we will deal with local people, again thinking, and almost immediately it was international. So it is an international, and I think a lot of that, like you said, in COVID, is really did change where people just to get on screens and they're okay. I mean, I don't even really think, is this person in UK, or are they in California, are they in New York? It's just so. And as far as the industries, when we say we deal a lot with VFX and animation, but it's anyone who's using those type of workflows. So I would say that's 50%. The other 50% is other things like people who are using AI, people who are creative departments within larger corporations. It's a good advantages there because they can get access to services and machines that they may not have in their departments. Surprisingly, sports teams, where we're doing a lot of sports teams because that's kind of an IMT group, but it's the workflows that they're doing as far as, and we're not dealing with the sports aspect, but we're dealing with the, the video training and the, meta tagging of that and moving data and transferring it. Same tools, same sort of stuff. So, so it's interesting how it evolved from what we originally thought. But yeah, it's pretty well global, and it's expanded a lot beyond just the, studio in the cloud with the VFX animation guys.
Okay, great. Well, we will leave in the show notes for those of you listening a link to IMT's website. If Paul and Rob are okay with it, we'll include their emails or their LinkedIn profiles to make them easy to track down. And gentlemen, thank you for joining. I have to be honest, I used to go to NAB and shows like that, and Dead Drop Labs was always packed and doing some really interesting work, and I always really enjoyed the conversations I got to have with you all. So having you on the show was really a pleasure. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, Molly.
Thank you.
It's been fun talking with you.
Thanks for listening to Data Unchained, powered by Hammerspace. To learn more, visit hammerspace.com. If you have a guest you would like to hear on the show, email me at molly@hammerspace.com.